It's very wonderful to be able to teach for the master's program or give these talks. It feels like a very apt use of our skill sets here. We study so much in depth for so many years, and to be able to actually contribute in a way that others who are studying in depth can profit from what we've done. Otherwise, sometimes we wonder all this in-depth study for so many years, who is going to want to listen to it? But it's great that people are really interested in these subjects. So, as you all know, I'm here at Sera Je Monastery. Sera I am my house. I've been at Sera now for 18 years, and now almost at the end of the regular course of study for the Geshe studies, and in 2 years, most likely we'll be starting the Larampa course. So in the meantime, I will be doing my best to continue with these talks on a regular basis. So in terms of our talks for the subject of perfection of wisdom, we'd chosen several subjects. One of them I suggested as the first subject would be Bodhicitta. Actually, one moment, let me turn on some of the backlights in our temple. It looks like my face is a little dark, so just wait 1 minute. I think that makes it better. So when asked what would be the first subject I would like to cover in terms of perfection of wisdom, I suggested Bodhicitta for a couple of reasons. One is that I think this is the most important subject in all of perfection of wisdom. Really, everything revolves around it. And a lot of the points that come up here come up again and again. So it will be applicable to other subjects. The other reason is that I had the good fortune when I was able to participate 11 years ago in the Rikchung debates here at Sera Je, that I was given this subject of Bodhicitta. So that meant for 2.5 months, my partner and I were studying this in depth full time. We had to sit Damcha, which means sitting for answering debate. The two of us together had to do that 15 times in front of the various classes at Sera Je, and then twice we had to sit in front of house groups, and then culminating in a one-on-one debate in front of the monastery on the subject of bodhicitta. So that gave me a lot of points to debate about and to think about. And actually, as I prepared this talk, all I did was go through my notes that I had taken after all of those public debates and wrote down what people had debated on, and put these subjects together into this talk. So what I'll be presenting is mainly debate points. I think that most of you are studying these subjects, and so in terms of what is the definition of bodhicitta, what is the nature and the divisions and so forth in a general sense, there's no need in a short talk like this to just go over those one by one. I will be more focused on what are the points of debate that are difficult, that might open up areas for further inquiry and for your own thinking about these things. Because often what seems so obvious in the text, as soon as you try to say it more succinctly and specifically, especially, then it becomes problematic and complicated. So this is the purpose of debate, to help us to start to question these things. Just a question, as again, apologies for being late. Are we going to still do a 2-hour session? Is that okay? It's fine by my side. I was planning to do 2 hours here. And so, yeah. Okay, yeah, okay. So if any of you need to leave, of course, that's perfectly fine. But next time I'll be aware. It's a little confusing sometimes because India has the half-hour time difference. So I was thinking it was the same hour, but it's a half hour as well as the several hours of difference. So I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation. So let me upload that here. Okay, hope you can all see this. So here we have Bodhicitta, the expanded mind. And I'll explain in just a minute why I've given it this subtitle. So within Bodhicitta, we're of course we are covering this in regards to the way that it is presented in the perfection of wisdom, which means in the Abhisamayalankara, in the first chapter, either if you consider the short, what do you say, the summary at the beginning of the first chapter as part of the first chapter, or not. If you don't consider it as part of the first chapter, then the very first verse is what covers Bodhicitta. Right after there's the introductory verses. So that I think there's one verse of homage, two verses of explaining the purpose of the text, and then 15 summary verses. And right after that starts with Bodhicitta, and some people consider that the beginning of the first chapter. And that is then commented upon by Haribhadra in his clear meaning commentary, and then further commented upon by Tzong Khapa in his text, The Golden Garland, and by Tenzin Gache in the Sera Je textbook, which I think in English you've called Ocean of Sport. And then by Gyaltsab Je in his text, Ornament of the Essence, which really is actually Tzong Khapa's teachings. It said that Tzong Khapa composed Golden Garland when he was young, about 29 to 31, and then later modified some of his presentation of part of the perfection of wisdom. And so based on his later teachings, Gyaltsab Je put together Ornament of the Essence. And also there is Khedrup Je's text illuminating the difficult points. So what we debate here is mainly based on those, and many of the debates I am giving will be coming from those. And of course, from being from Sera Je, we take the Sera Je position. Occasionally, if I think of it, I'll mention if a position I'm taking is specific to Sera Je. There is Sera Je, the author is Trikhi Gelton, as I mentioned, and then there is Khedrup Tendar, his full name Khedrup Tempa Darge, is the author for Sera Me, and we have Penchen Sonandrakpa, who was from Drepung Losaling, and his texts are also used at Ganden Shartse, and then Jamyan Shepa, Hunkin Jamyan Shepa from Drepung Gomong. Those are the four main authors whose textbooks are studied in Geluk. And Jetsun Trikhi Gelton is also used at Ganden Jangse. Okay, so difficult points. These are the difficult points that we're going to cover. As I said, these are all just based on the debates I was given. Although we went, as I said, would have been total of 18 debates. Basically, I felt that we didn't have the same debate presented to us twice. There's so many different points to cover within the subject of bodhicitta. So these are some of the ones that I thought were the most important. We'll see what we can get through. I'm hoping we can get through them all today, but I won't rush. I'll just see what we can do. So etymology, I'll explain, as I said, about why I call it the expanded mind. And then we have causes and mental basis. So there's different causes that are presented in different texts, and also I'll explain what is meant by mental basis. Then we have the question of compassion within the sevenfold instructions, which means the sevenfold cause and effect instructions on how to develop bodhicitta. Then we have object of observation, object of the mode of apprehension, and other's purpose. So these two terms, object of observation and object of the mode of apprehension, those of you who have studied minds and awareness hopefully will be familiar with those. And I tried as much as possible to use the standard terms in the FPMT translated dictionary. So I'm hoping that these will be familiar translations of these terms for all of you. And then also other's purpose. We say that bodhicitta is for the purpose of others. And what does that mean? And that's related to what is the object of observation, as I'll explain. And then we have inspiring and engaging bodhicitta in terms of especially how do we divide those? What is the difference between them? There's quite a bit of disagreement even among the different Geluk texts between Tzong Khapa and then the Sera Je. When I say Tzong Khapa, I mean the Golden Garland. As I said before, the Ornament of the Essence is technically based on Tzong Khapa's teachings, but I'll say Gyaltsab Je when I say the Gyaltsab Je says such and such, I mean in the Ornament of the Essence. And then we have two simultaneous conceptions, meaning can somebody, a sentient being, have two simultaneous conceptions at the same time? So conceptual thoughts. That's related to talking about aspiring and engaging bodhicitta, because in context of engaging bodhicitta, we talk about directly conjoined with another mind. So does that imply that two minds are functioning simultaneously? Then we have a shepherd-like bodhicitta. So some of you know we have the division into shepherd-like and ferryman-like and king-like bodhicitta. So the king-like bodhicitta is fairly straightforward. The shepherd-like and also the ferryman, it's the same issue. A question of are they correct? Is it actually possible to think I will first put all sentient beings in enlightenment and then achieve enlightenment myself? And then we have ultimate bodhicitta, which is really the direct perception of emptiness for an Arya bodhisattva. So we'll talk about some of the difficult points related to that. So next we move on to the etymology. So for etymology, some of you might know in Tibetan, we have the term semke, which is usually translated into English as mind generation. So the term bodhicitta in Tibetan is jangjupki sem. That's fairly straightforward. There's the jangjup or bodhi is enlightenment. And then sem just means the mind aspiring for enlightenment. But then semke, there's a bit of a question of what does the ke mean here? Sem, again, is mind, but it's been translated pretty much universally that I've seen as a mind generation. I'm not sure how this started, although I notice Jeffrey Hopkins, who I generally consider the most authoritative translator. I don't think I've ever seen anything in his any of his translations that I would consider a mistake. And so usually I would feel confident to just take whatever he says as the correct translation. Nevertheless, in this I have some questions about it. So he has chosen mind generation also. So I have here a list of reasons why we would insist on translating semke as mind generation, and then reasons why maybe we would translate it as expanded mind, which I have done. Because the word ke in Tibetan can have both meanings. It can mean to generate. It can also mean to expand or increase something. That's a less common etymology. It's not very common at all in colloquial, but we see it sometimes. And actually, now that we are studying Vinaya, I see it a lot more frequently. It was used a lot in the Vinaya text to very explicitly mean expansion. So mind generation, again, I apologize. I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, so I might not be pronouncing all of these properly, but one of the students here, fortunately, has helped me with these. So we have chitta utpata. So chitta, again, is mind, and utpata is what's translated as ke. So it would appear from our current research that the ke does not support the reading of expanded, that would only imply generation in Sanskrit. So that would be a very strong reason in and of itself that the original meaning of this term in Sanskrit was generation. But then I'll show why I think expanded mind might be correct. So the first is that if it was generation, then the term ought to be present tense. Right? Mind generation is not saying generated mind or mind that will be generated. It ought to be a present tense verb. But the ke, as you see in Tibetan, there is this prefix, bao it's called, that necessitates that it's either a past or a future tense verb. So already the term mind generation doesn't quite seem to make sense. There's a second one that there is a reason that bodhicitta must be a main mind rather than a mental factor. So some of you might have seen this debate in many of these texts. If we see it in Golden Garland, we see it in Jason Turkey Kelsen's texts, that there's an insistence that bodhicitta is not a mental factor. Although it's called we have in Abhisamaya Alankara, some of you know the verse Semke Pani Shendun Jir Yangduk Zope Jangjuk Du, which means bodhicitta is the wish, or really mind generation or expanded mind is the wish to achieve enlightenment for all sentient beings, for the benefit of others. So the wish, it says wish, but then it's argued very strongly by the scholars that it's only called a wish. Even Haribhadra himself says that it's not actually a wish, it's a main mind. A wish would be synonymous with the mental factor that is the first of the five object ascertaining mental factors, which is, I think, aspiration. Maybe it's sometimes translated dunpa in Tibetan. That is synonymous with dupa, which means a desire or wish. It's important to understand that some people sometimes think that desire in Buddhism is considered a negative mental state, but actually that translates duchak, which really ought to be translated as desire attachment. It means something that exaggerates the qualities of an object, and that object has to also be a contaminated object. So desire in and of itself is not a negative thing. It's very positive to have the desire to be enlightened and to have a kind of ambition about doing something beneficial. It's a afflicted mind when it is based on delusion, when it's misapprehending the object and exaggerating the qualities. But in terms of here, it's correctly ascertaining and judging the possibility of attaining enlightenment and wishing to do so. But in any case, it's argued that it's not the wish itself is not bodhicitta. It's the main mind that is concomitant with it. But there's a question of why. What's the problem with it being a mental factor? And it's not really presented, except the only clear statement that's made by Tzong Khapa is that the etymology does not support that it is a mental factor. The etymology supports that it has to be a main mind. So if we talked about mind generation, well, we could just as easily talk about generating the desire for enlightenment. That wouldn't seem to negate the possibility of that. But expanded mind, it would be a little odd to say expanded desire. So what this implies, right? It's not, we say expanded mind. Sometimes in English we might hear that it's just talking about taking drugs or something like that, but that's not the idea here. It's that by having a wish for enlightenment, you become more magnanimous. Your mind becomes bigger. You're thinking not just of me, but you're thinking of all sentient beings. And so you've expanded your scope of possibility of what you can do. I can achieve enlightenment for all sentient beings. So that the desire to achieve enlightenment causes you to have an expanded mind. If we don't say the desire to achieve enlightenment causes you to have expanded desire, it just doesn't sound right. And it could also be misapprehended, of course, as saying that it increases your afflictions. So it would seem that the idea that it's expanded mind would support this idea of it needing to be a main mind. The third reason, and this is how I originally came to this conclusion, or at least started to investigate this point, is that Pabongko Rinpoche, many of you will know, the teacher, Pabongko Rinpoche, was very explicit. I read this in his commentary in the 6th session Guru Yoga. He etymologizes Semkye as Cheru Tangwa, which means made bigger, a mind that has been made bigger. So when I had that question, I asked a senior person who's helped me with a lot of the translations I've done, as Gache here at Sera, and he said that specifically, yes, it means expanded mind. He kind of laughed. He said if people are translating it as mind generation, maybe they just looked in the dictionary at the word K and came up with that, but that's not what it means. So it's clear that Tibetans read it this way. And I asked some of my classmates who were better debaters in our class, and they said, oh yeah, it means expanded mind. It doesn't mean mind generation. That's odd to think that. I mean, I didn't ask them in English. They don't speak English, but I explained, does it mean like you generate a seed? From a seed, you generate a sprout, or does it mean that you increase something, that you increase the size of your mind? And they said, yeah, it's the second one. And what this Geshe that I mentioned before, what he said is it's like if you just thinking of me, so he said if you're living in your house at Sera and you just cook for yourself every day, or if you think about everyone in your house and you cook for everybody, that's expanded mind. So then another reason is that the colloquial word loke, we actually often it's pronounced loke, implies an expansion of knowledge. It's a very common colloquial term. So we say, if you go to a public debate, for example, and you're watching it, and afterwards somebody asks you, "Loge rasoe," like, did you get loke? Did you get more knowledge from this? So that's very similar. Lo and sem are pretty much the same thing. They're fairly synonymous. So in that context, it means that And actually, one of my classmates, he even sent me, when I asked him this question, he later sent me from a dictionary he had, there is a colloquial word semke, which means to broaden your mind. So it's in the example in the dictionary of using that word in a sentence was something like semkene lobjongche. So it means like expand your mind and then study, meaning that you open your mind and then think about studying things that you didn't know before. And then finally, as I mentioned before, there are other translations of the term ke that come from Sanskrit. It would be good. We haven't found out yet what that original term was in Sanskrit, but if it was utpata, then it would clearly indicate that that term can mean expansion. Because, for example, in the Vinaya, we have several of the downfalls of a fully ordained monk. One of them is called takye. It's just a shortened form. Really, it's takbar kep, or sorry. So the word takpa means to weave. So it was actually would be like go takne de keduton, meaning that somebody. So in this context, it means that a sponsor, for example, asks a weaver to make robes for the monk, for the fully ordained monk, who then goes to the weaver privately after the sponsor has already asked for the robes to be made and says, "Oh, make it a little bigger than he asked for," which then puts the sponsor in an awkward position because he or she is forced to pay for the extra robe cloth. So then clearly it means expansion. It doesn't mean generation, and it's clearly explained that way in the Vinaya. So there's some Sanskrit word that is being translated here as ke, that is meaning expansion. We have to check if it's the same here as upata. So far, we haven't discovered that. But at the moment, I understand the term this way. It seems to me to make a lot more sense. Otherwise, mind generation, what is that really expressing? Whereas expanded mind has some meaning behind it. And as I said, whether it was the meaning in Sanskrit originally, it's how Tibetans understand it now. And I think that's a fairly good indicator because it's quite extraordinary sometimes to see how some of these etymologies have been preserved for over 1,000 years in Tibet, even though the Sanskrit texts are no longer available. They still are aware of what was the original etymology in the Sanskrit. So it would be unusual if they just completely made it different, or had a mistake somewhere along the line about what the word means. So okay, now we move on to causes. So what are the causes of bodhicitta? First of all, we have the compendium of training. Some of you might know from Shantideva. So in the various texts, like in Jiten Chukyi Gyaltsen's text, he lists several Indian texts that he quotes as giving causes of bodhicitta. But what he says in the end, and I'll say that before we even get into them, is that most of these are not actual causes of bodhicitta, or at least not necessary causes. The real cause of bodhicitta, the main cause, should be compassion, and also faith, which I'll discuss. Faith in the possibility of achieving Buddhahood. These other ones are considered possible causes or even erroneous causes. So it said that these ones, especially from Compendium of Training, most of them, it said causes of mere bodhicitta, meaning it's not actual bodhicitta. It's somebody who just wants to become a Buddha for some reason or another, but not for the right reason. So it doesn't actually become bodhicitta. Bodhicitta has to be that I want to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. So these causes that it examines, one is seeing a Buddha's body and thinking, I'd like to achieve something like that. So it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I want to save all sentient beings. It could just be, we see the Buddha and say, wow, he looks really wonderful. It would be great if I could be like that too. Then people would like me and make offerings to me, something like that. So that's not really a correct cause. It could lead to the correct cause. It could lead someone to have interest, but it's not the cause that we want to generate in the end. And then secondly, similarly to that, seeing and hearing about the inconceivable power of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So then again, a sense of awe without a real understanding of how to get there, what's the purpose of becoming a Buddha. The third one is a little bit better. It's being unable to bear the disappearance of the teachings in this world. So seeing that, for example, right now on planet Earth, that the Buddha's teachings aren't they're in danger of disappearing. For example, in Tibet, there's not religious freedom right now. In the monasteries in India that are re-established, that there's less people than there was in the past, and there's a danger that after some generations, these teachings won't be here anymore. So thinking, I would like to achieve enlightenment so that I can reinvigorate the teachings. That's a fairly good reason, and it could be a good support, but it's still not considered full bodhicitta, because bodhicitta is not just thinking about this life in this world system. It's thinking that I want to achieve full enlightenment, that I can continue to benefit sentient beings as long as space endures. So it's just thinking about right now in this world at this time. I think that's quite something important to think about. Sometimes you might have a fairly good motivation, but it's still a bit narrow, and we're just thinking about this world and all these things happening, and we're concerned about war and famine and the environment, which again I fully support that we should be careful about those things and do as best we can and everything in our power to solve these problems. But at the same time, we need to have a broader mind. We don't want to be so caught up in them that we think this is it. And if the world, for example, if there was to be some major calamity and the world was to have kind of apocalypse, that therefore it's complete disaster, and then will never be hope again. We have to think of things in context and see it in the broader context, and that actually should hopefully allow us to act in a more effective way in the short term. Also, His Holiness the Dalai Lama often talks about that he's been saying several times in the past years that I hope he doesn't mean this literally, but he often says that there's not much time left for the current aeon, and that but if you take teachings now, then I'll meet you again in the future. So that first part, I don't know. I hope he's not meaning it literally, but in terms of the second part, even if it is literal, even if that is what happens, it doesn't mean there's no more hope. There's still always the possibility of continuing in the future. And even for someone who's achieved enlightenment, it doesn't just end in one life, it continues. So then finally, we have seeing sentient beings oppressed by suffering and being unable to bear it. So that is really the correct cause, the cause that we're trying to cultivate, that leads to compassion. So next we have causes that are presented in Bodhisattva grounds by Asanga. So some of these are similar. There's 4 causes, 4 conditions, and 4 forces. The 4 causes are all mostly essential. Actually, I wouldn't say completely essential, but these are the main ones that we need. So the first of the excellent lineage is talking about we sometimes call Buddha nature, the Buddha lineage. That's what the real cause. If we don't have that, then it's not possible to achieve enlightenment. But at least in the Madhyamaka system, that is universal. Everybody has that cause, that possibility. It's also possible to understand this as being born into a good family, which means essentially that you're born in a place where you have the opportunity to practice. It doesn't mean that there's some discrimination in terms of caste, simply that practically speaking, people who are in situations where they can afford to leave their family behind and go off to become a monastic or to practice intensively, then it's easier if you have the support in this lifetime. Secondly is being supported by a virtuous friend, which is an essential cause, but as we'll see in the context of the forces, that it's not actually the most important. The more important part is one's own motivation. Thirdly is great compassion, which is the most essential cause. And the fourth is being unafraid of the sufferings of samsara. Some of you might have the translation that Zege has made of Ornament of the Essence. And I think I recall, because I was editing that text a couple of years ago, I think that there was the same typo in that text that there is in the Sera Je textbook by Jetsun Choki Gyaltsen, where it says being afraid of the suffering of samsara. And I think, if I recall, she had translated it that way, and I had to comment on it. So if that's the case, some of you might have that in your translation. But it's clear from looking at Bodhisattva grounds itself that that's not what it means. Being afraid of the suffering of samsara, it doesn't mean that I'm afraid of samsara and therefore I want to get out of it and achieve enlightenment. It's saying the opposite, that one is willing to stay in samsara longer and not just achieve private enlightenment or a solitary liberation as an arhat, but to achieve full enlightenment, and therefore being willing to take a lot longer, being willing to undergo hardship for a long time in order to achieve full enlightenment. So the next we have conditions. These are somewhat similar to what we saw in the Shantideva's text, so seeing and hearing about the magical powers of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. These are considered useful, helpful supports, but not absolutely necessary. So again, hearing the Mahayana Pitaka, the Mahayana teachings. So these are very, very supportive. But if someone has bodhicitta imprint from a past life, then even that can ripen without necessarily even before one is exposed to the teachings. But that's a fairly essential cause of those four conditions, probably the most important one. The third one is seeing that the Mahayana teachings will soon disappear, which is similar to what we talked about before, and then seeing the afflictions of sentient beings in this epoch or in this time period, which again is similar in that's a bit limited. It's a very good motivating factor, and we can use it to motivate ourselves, but we shouldn't limit ourselves in scope to simply the sentient beings in this place and time right now. Then we have the four forces. So these are actually, you can't have all four of them per se, because the first and the third, and versus the second and the first and the second essentially are not compatible, and the third and the fourth are not compatible. So you have one or the other. So we have one's own force, which means that from your own motivation, your own thought about how important it is to achieve enlightenment for sentient beings, you generate bodhicitta, versus another's force, meaning that through the influence of a very charismatic teacher or a very qualified teacher, then you generate bodhicitta. And then the third is the causal force, which means that you practice in past lives, and then it naturally arises again in this life. The fourth is the force of application, meaning that the effort you make in this life, it's primarily for that rather than from the past life. So it said that among these, the first and the third are stable, and the second and the fourth are not stable. So we can understand that fairly straightforwardly with the first two, that if it's really coming from you and your own motivation, then that's quite stable. Whereas if it's motivated by somebody else's goading you on, then, for example, if that teacher dies or you no longer around them every day, then the bodhicitta might gradually decline. Then with the causal force, this is a little bit more difficult, because sometimes we might think really the most important thing is your own effort right now. But it's essentially saying that the effort from the past lives is stronger. So somebody might not have generated bodhicitta in the past and generate it newly now. It's somewhat unstable. Whereas somebody who generated it in a past life and it just comes naturally, then it's very stable. They still have to do some level of application in this life, absolutely, but it's stronger this way. So it's essentially showing that we shouldn't feel discouraged thinking, oh, I didn't have it in the past life and therefore it's going to be unstable. But the point is that we don't just think about generating it now. We think that whatever imprints I make now will make it very stable in the future life. And so we can start and then have that ripen again in the future. So then we have the causes according to the Jewel Lamp Sutra. It's another way of presenting them. So this is written in verse. So it says, arousing faith in victors and the Dharma, producing faith in victors' grandsons' great deeds, and then in unsurpassed enlightenment, great beings go on to generate this mind. Of course, I think we could actually say it to expand their mind, I suppose, of how we want to translate it, but I've just done that here based on what it says in the verse in Tibetan, but we could read it also as expand the mind. But I think the point here is that we generate bodhicitta newly. I even asked my classmate, well, we have the other more expansive way of saying, well, we generate the mind for complete enlightenment. Doesn't it at least there mean generate? And he said he doesn't think so. He thinks even there it means expand the mind towards complete enlightenment. So maybe I made an error here, translating it this way. I didn't catch that when I was looking through it. I'm not sure, but that's something to debate about. Anyway, here, there's three causes being presented. Some of you if any of you have read Golden Garland by Tzong Khapa, you'll see that he presents these three causes as the mental basis It says the mental basis is, then he goes on to list these three. At least at Sera Je, we disagree with that. So we say we never would say Tzong Khapa was wrong. That's not really appropriate in debate most of the time. But we would say, well, he didn't mean it as a literal mental basis. He meant it as the cause. And I'll explain in a minute why that wouldn't fit with what we mean by mental basis. But in any case, we do agree that these are important causes. So the first is faith observing the victors or the Buddhas, and then faith in Bodhisattva's deeds. So Victor's sons. I apologize. It should be Victor's children to make it more, so we say inclusive. But I did this for the purpose of having the verse fit into the meter. I tend to try to translate the meter into English in a standard way. So sons with only one syllable, it was easier. But really, of course, it should include both sons and daughters. So seeing that it's possible to practice the Bodhisattva actions and then achieve enlightenment, and then finally seeing the benefits of complete enlightenment, and therefore by producing faith. So it's all talking about faith. So I'll explain actually after in a couple slides about faith and how that's discussed in Tzong Khapa's commentary. Next, we have mental basis. So some of you might have seen this term, mental basis. I'm not sure. I think I took this from the FPMT dictionary. If it was in there, I would have taken it, but I wasn't. I can't remember if it was actually in there. But anyway, this term in Tibetan, semden, so mental mind basis, or the den, and then we sometimes hear there's the bodily basis and the mind basis. So the bodily basis is what form you need to have as a human being or as an animal, and it says, at least in our system, that it can be any of the 6 classes of migrators can generate bodhicitta. That's quite a point of debate also. But in terms of the mental basis, it's not a cause. It's one nature, we say, with the bodhicitta. So it's not that we first have a particular mind, and then on the basis of that, then we generate bodhicitta afterwards. It's that we have a particular level of stability of mind such that when we generate bodhicitta, it arises in that nature. That's the meaning of mental basis. So for example, if somebody is going to generate bodhicitta on the basis of we say an actual form absorption, some of you might know what that means, right? Dhyana, Sanskrit. Then when bodhicitta is generated, bodhicitta is itself a form absorption. So it's of one nature with bodhicitta. So that would contradict Tzong Khapa saying mental basis is these 3 causes. And actually, even Tzong Khapa himself, later in the text, Golden Garland, in the section on the 5 eyes and the 6 clairvoyances, he specifically says this, explicitly says that when we say mental basis, we don't mean like a sprout producing a seed. Like we usually think of a cause, or a pot holding a plant where they're of 2 different natures. The pot is one thing, the plant is another. He says it's like generating something in the nature of it. He says this is the uncommon system of the Abhidharma. So it seems that he has that understanding of mental basis. So maybe it's true that when he said mental basis earlier, he didn't mean it literally. These are points of debate here. But essentially, what it says in the Ornament of the Essence, or what it says in the later textbooks, that it's produced in the nature of the ground. So the bodhicitta is produced itself as a first level concentration, or second, third, fourth level concentration, or as a access concentration, which is the preparatory concentration that we achieve. So essentially, one needs to have calm abiding and special insight. And just to clarify, because sometimes people understand special insight to mean insight into emptiness, that's not exactly correct. The word halakdong or vipassana, or vipassana in Pali, I'm sure all of you know that term. It doesn't refer to simply insight into selflessness or emptiness. It just means the ability to analyze things within calm abiding, so that you have the union of calm abiding and special insight. Then you have not only achieved calm abiding, but you can analyze things without it harming your concentration. And not only does it not harm the concentration, but it enhances the concentration, enhances the bliss that is generated through concentration. So that when one achieves that ability, that is called special insight. So It needs a basis that is both stable and analytical. Without that, then it's not possible to generate a stable bodhicitta because the mind will fluctuate too much. And it needs to be not only stable, but analyzed. Bodhicitta is generated based on analysis. It's based on analysis of the nature of things and of the situation of sentient beings, not just something that comes through going into a concentrated state of mind. So then we have, this is one of the major debates. I can't say for sure whether it's going to seem so terribly relevant to one's own personal practice, but it's something that people like to debate. And honestly, when I went to all those debates all those years ago, this was the one at which I had the hardest time. I remember the person debating me, and felt great gratitude to him afterwards for embarrassing me in front of so many people, for not being able to posit this clearly. I had been given this particular presentation of what paths need mental basis by one of my teachers, and I can't blame him. It wasn't his fault. It was just that I wasn't able to defend it in a consistent way, which is not just enough to have what might be the right answer. You also have to be able to defend it against various counterpoints, and I hadn't actually ascertained it well enough to be able to do so at the time. So we had quite a hard time that day. So the question is, bodhicitta needs a mental basis. We'll see in the text that other minds, like the path of preparation, it says, also the path of seeing, the path of meditation, also the 5 eyes and the 6 clairvoyances, they need mental bases. So do all paths need mental bases or only certain ones? And which ones need mental bases? It's generally understood that not all need mental bases. For example, if you have the mind thinking, I would like to abandon the 10 non-virtues, and similar to that, the monastic vows, or the bodhisattva vows, those are all, when somebody has achieved a path, has entered the path, then those are all paths, we say, the path consciousnesses. But they don't require a mental basis. They don't require any kind of particular stability of mind. If they did, then nobody could take monastic vows without having achieved calm abiding, but that would be very difficult. But so which minds need mental bases? So we generally say there's 4 factors that mind needs to fulfill. One is that it is an effortlessly produced mind achieved by meditation on calm abiding and special insight. So effortfully produced means that some of you might have heard this understanding that at the end of the aeon, when the world system dissolves or sort of burns up or is dissolved in water, there's different ways the world can end. Then all the sentient beings, there's no longer anywhere for them to be born within the desire realm because the desire realm dissolves. The whole world, maybe we call it, say, the big crunch in modern science. Then there's nowhere left to be born. So everyone is born within the higher realms. The first absorption upwards, or actually, I think the second absorption upwards, they say. Maybe it's the fourth. I can't remember. I'm blanking on that, but I think it's actually might be the fourth onwards. But in any case, everyone has to achieve immediately the concentrations, otherwise they won't be born there. So it just happens spontaneously. It said that it's based on their karma to experience the desire realm is temporarily suspended. Their karma to experience through the universe exhausts itself, and so beings are just naturally born within the higher realms. So then they just naturally, due to their past karma, achieve calm abiding and special insight into the higher realms. But that's not really a mental basis. So here it's talking about an effortfully produced mind. One makes effort to achieve them. Secondly, is it initially generated in a manifest fashion? So if you would have some minds are not necessarily manifest when they are first generated. So one of the examples that's given of this is among the 5 eyes, we have the 4th eye, which is the Dharma eye, which is a kind of clairvoyance into the minds of other practitioners and knowing their capacities. It said that all Arya Bodhisattvas have this, but when some first becomes an Arya Bodhisattva, they don't have this right away in manifest way because they're in meditative absorption. So it's just generated on the side naturally. It doesn't come through particularly making effort to generate this mind at this time. So it doesn't necessarily have to have a mental basis. But at the same time, at least in that context, the Dharma eye, it does have some stability, but it's not presented as needing a mental basis in the text. And then we have one that arises at the time of a great transformation. Actually, so I mixed it up right there. See, this is why I had trouble in debate. The Dharma eye is the one that's the counterexample here. So the great transformation is that one at the time of going through, for example, you achieve the path of accumulation. That's a great transformation. You transform from being a non-path, not entered a path, to entering a path. Then you achieve the path of preparation, time of a great transformation. But for example, the second moment of the path of preparation, or some particular mind that is a path of preparation, that's not the first moment, it's not a great transformation. There's no presentation of a mental basis. So that's what it is. With the context of the Dharma eye, it's that one achieves that at post-meditative equipoise. And so that's no longer a great transformation. So some of you might want to debate back. Well, it says clearly in the text, the Dharma eye is based upon its mental basis, actual concentration. So that's contradictory. That was, I think, one of the reasons I had trouble when I tried to answer according to my teacher's instructions. But what he answered to me later was that, well, I said what paths need mental bases. I didn't say what minds need mental bases. And the five eyes are not necessarily paths. They could exist in a person who's not entered a path. So he said that the five eyes don't have to have, they might have to have mental bases, but they don't have to fit the definition of a path that needs a mental basis. That's one way to answer it. I debated him a little bit back. I wouldn't debate my teacher. It's a bit inappropriate, but I tried to at least ask him. I was a little concerned some years later when we studied the fourth chapter, and it says that the path of emanation, as some of you might know, is in the fourth chapter, which is the path, requires a mental basis, but it doesn't arise at the time of when you first achieve the path of accumulation, first achieve path of preparation. So I asked him, well, when does that not then become an outlier, or if we say rogue, you could say, in terms of trying to fit into your this system that you've given. So he just said, well, you're transforming from not being able to emanate to being able to emanate. So if I had been in debate, I would have debated that, but it's my teacher, I'm in class, so I just left it there. It's something to think about. And then finally, we have one that arises in the nature of the ground. So we see that when you achieve Bodhicitta, it arises as a actual concentration or as an access concentration. It's not that you first have one and you get the other on the basis of that, but it's two different natures. They're one nature in this case. So for example, when you achieve the actual concentration, you achieve it on the basis of access concentration, but the actual concentration doesn't arise in the aspect of the access concentration. They're two different natures. You can't have both of them simultaneously. They're cause and effect. That's not considered the mental basis in that case. So next we have the main cause is great compassion. So the desire of observing others' purpose. Some of you might know this definition of bodhicitta. So what is it? Ragizo. Well, I'll try to say it in English. Sometimes it's easier to say it in Tibetan first, but it might be confusing. So the wish to achieve full enlightenment for the benefit of others. And then we say it's the main mind that's conjoined with that. It's a little more complicated than that. But it's saying there's a wish to achieve enlightenment for others. So what is others' purpose? And it says that others' purpose is talking about compassion here. So it's a cause. This thought for the purpose of all sentient beings is actually not bodhicitta itself. Bodhicitta just thinks, I must achieve enlightenment. Doesn't literally think, as we'll explain later, I will do so for others. That's a separate mind. That is the cause. So that is compassion. And then we have the question, does compassion need a mental basis? This is also one of the questions that comes up in these debates. The actual Richtung debate at the end, my partner, he debated me on this point, which is again a little bit technical, I guess we could say, although it certainly has practical consequences. whether compassion needs a mental basis or not. So it's saying, can you achieve compassion without having achieved calm abiding and special insight? And the general accepted accepted position, although it's not in any of the texts that I've seen, is that it does not need a mental basis. The reason being, which again is a bit of it, it seems like it's a bit based on technicalities of the text, so it's questionable. We have to test in practice if whether that's true or just theory. But the reason it's given is that it says, first of all, in the Lamrim Chenmo, that it's an absurd position to say that even to have any kind of taste of bodhicitta, that you need to have calm abiding. So it's implying that you can have some kind of contrived bodhicitta without having calm abiding. So then we have the point, well, what is contrived bodhicitta? We say it's what we call the bodhicitta, like the bark of a molasses tree, I think it is in English. So it's saying that the real fruit is inside, the sweet taste is inside. The bark has the very little essence of that taste. You haven't gotten to the real taste yet. So that we call it's just for short in Tibetan we call it Shumpa Tapo Semgye, which means bark like bodhicitta, or bark like my expanded mind, if you want to say it that way. So in that case, it's understood that we need compassion, great compassion, before achieving that, especially if somebody is, we call a sharp facultied practitioner, where they don't they don't make a firm determination to do something unless they're absolutely certain they can do so. They've ascertained that through valid cognition. So they wouldn't in order to ascertain that it's possible to achieve enlightenment, they first have to take the time to bother to examine that. And it's understood, as it's explained, if some of you have studied Madhyamaka, it's explained in the general presentation of Madhyamaka by Tenzin Gache, that without great compassion, somebody would not take the effort to actually examine whether it's possible to be enlightened. And that just doesn't just mean in a haphazard way to actually practice to the point where they have a full realization, a valid cognizer ascertaining the possibility of enlightenment, because that takes an enormous amount of effort to get there. And somebody wouldn't do so if they didn't first generate great compassion and have some reason, some motivation for doing so. This is based on this understanding. Maybe when we get to Madhyamaka, I'll explain. I could get into it now, but it said that Bodhisattva ascertains emptiness through countless lines of reasoning. And it said that the cause of that has to be compassion. So there's some source for that in some of the traditional texts. And that's why Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen is then taking it out and explaining it more in depth. So then it's implying that in order to have this bark-like bodhicitta, you need to have compassion first. And the bark-like bodhicitta, as we said in the Lamrim Chenmo, it says it does not require calm abiding. It says it would be absurd to think so. So therefore, in order to achieve that, you need to have compassion first. And if you don't need calm abiding for bark-like bodhicitta, then you wouldn't need calm abiding even to achieve great compassion. So that's, as I say, that's the technicality of it. In practice, how that pans out, we'd have to maybe do some studies of different people who have generated great compassion and see, does it require having achieved calm abiding first? So next we have compassion within the sevenfold cause and effect instructions. So this is a question we have, as some of you know, the sevenfold cause and effect instructions that were transmitted to Tibet from Atisha, who took from his teacher Silingpa in modern-day Indonesia, Sumatra. There's the recognizing one's mother, recognizing all sentient beings as one mother, really, and then recalling the kindness of the mother, wishing to repay the kindness, and then affectionate love, and then compassion, and then the altruistic intention, and finally bodhicitta. So there's no question, this fifth step in the instructions, compassion, is that talking about great compassion, or is it just talking about general compassion? And it actually would appear in the Lamrim Chenmo that there are two contradictory positions presented if we read it closely. So it's left a bit vague, and even in Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen's textbook, it makes some rather vague statements about it that it's hard to interpret. So that becomes a big point of debate. The first thing is that in Tenzin Gyaltsen's textbook, for the fourth cause, love, he then lists there are three kinds of love: affectionate love, immeasurable love, and great love. So the great love would be similar to great compassion and being an uncommon Mahayana practice. A non-Mahayanist cannot generate great love, which is the thought, not only may all sentient beings be happy, but may I make that happen myself. So if someone has that thought, then they can no longer be abiding on a Hinayana path. Now, affectionate love is simply the idea that one sees all sentient beings as, it says attractive in the text, yiong in Tibetan. But really, it doesn't just mean they're attracted to beings, but it's sort of that the way a mother views her son. He doesn't judge my son as ugly or beautiful. Whether other people might see the son as ugly, the mother still sees him as the most precious thing in the world. So it's that one sees all sentient beings in that way, that all sentient beings are the most precious and wonderful, and I feel a sense of camaraderie and closeness with them, regardless of who they are. And then we have immeasurable love, which is the thought, may all sentient beings have achieved happiness. I was also talking about, we talk about immeasurable love in the context of the form absorptions, but that's not what we mean here. We just simply mean thought, may all sentient beings achieve enlightenment. Be happy. And then great love is the thought, not only may they be happy, but may I make that happen myself. So if the great love was the fourth link, then it would imply that it's already a Mahayanist at this point. But in the Lamrim Chemo anyway, it says it's affectionate love. In this context, it talks about affectionate love. So at least what some of my teachers have said, and what we come to agree on generally in debate, is that Tenzin Gyaltsen there is just making a general presentation of love. He's not saying that the fourth link is actually great love. Really, it's affectionate love. And also because Tsongkhapa says in the Lamrim Chemo, in order to achieve the fifth link, compassion, you first have to have affectionate love. He has to first have to have the fourth link, he says fairly explicitly. Whereas he says later in the same text, in terms of great love and great compassion, there's no certainty that one will arise before the other, that one could come first. So then it would imply that they could be interchangeable, the fourth and the fifth. But he says the fourth has to come first. So if it was great love, that wouldn't make sense. But if it's affectionate love, it makes more sense. But then he does say in the Lamrim Chemo, the first four, meaning remembering the mother up through great or affectionate love, are the causes. The fifth is the root of the path, of Mahayana path. The latter two are results. Latter two, altruistic intention and Bodhicitta, are the results of that. So if it was really the case that the fifth is the root of the path, then one should be a Mahayanist at this point. It means the root of the Mahayana path. So it should be great compassion. That seems pretty straightforward, except that he later says in the same text, in Lamrim Chemo, not just a few pages later, is what is the need for the sixth? Why do we need this? We say Hlaksam Namdak in Tibetan is translated as altruistic intention. It literally means maybe it is translated this way for you. It's the supreme, the pure special or pure supreme thought, right? So what is the need for that if we already had great or compassion, at least at the fifth one? So the Tsongkhapa then says, well, because immeasurable love and immeasurable compassion are shared with hearers and solitary realizers. But here, one takes personal responsibility. And he says very explicitly, and this is where one becomes a Mahayanist. This is unshared by non-Mahayanists. So then it would imply that this is actually great compassion, whereas before it wasn't great compassion. So then it's quite a point of debate here. The Khapa also talks about mother and father-like compassion. Maybe today we should make it more politically correct. We could change that, but in any case, these are the words he uses in the Lamrim Chemo. So mother-like is, he says, if a child falls into the well, the mother wishes he could be free, but she doesn't jump in the well. The father jumps in the well and actually grabs the boy. So likewise, the mother-like compassion is the fifth one. He doesn't say that explicitly. It's a good point that it doesn't explicitly say the fifth is mother-like, the sixth is father-like, although that would seem to be the implication. So this fifth is just wishing, and then the sixth is actually taking responsibility. So generally, although there are different positions on this, at least I took the position that the sixth is great compassion, the fifth is not. However, what one of my teachers made we said the shipcha means like the fine distinction. Well, why did it list these great compassion there? And Tsongkhapa himself does. He says, what is great compassion? There's just three kinds of compassion. He lists them there. There's the first, the thought, how wonderful if all sentient beings were free of suffering, then may they be, and finally, I will cause them to be. So it's understood that actually the very last moment of the fifth training is the great compassion. So it goes through those three phases as one develops. And then finally, just before one achieves the altruistic intention of the sixth, then it is actually great compassion. So it is unshared. And then it becomes very forceful. That becomes the sixth step. So that seems to be a reasonable position that can help us to defend the different textbooks. And then to be able to defend this point, the fifth is the root of the path. At least the very last piece of it is, you could say. And then we have this point of what does it mean, holding solitary peace as sufficient for one's own and others' purpose. So we see this statement in the Lamrim Chemo. It's also, if some of you are studying Perfection of Wisdom, in the early section, what we call Jamshung in Tibetan, which is the section near the beginning when it talks about, does Maitreya have the thought for his own benefit when he composes the verses of homage. So there it talks about reversing the holding solitary peace as sufficient both for one's own purpose and for one's other's purpose. So it says that we need to do both. And compassion, great compassion, is what reverses it for others' purpose. That thinking that merely achieving solitary peace is fine. There's no reason that I need to do more for sentient beings. When you have great compassion, you can no longer think that. But there could still be the thought that for my own purpose, in my own development, that's the best I can possibly achieve. So I don't want to just fall into the remainderless nirvana because I couldn't help anybody. But nevertheless, there's no real higher goal in terms of developing my own mind. So for that, it's required to have faith in the Buddha, faith in the possibility of full enlightenment. So compassion is only one piece of it here. We have to reverse both of those in order to achieve fully characterized bodhicitta. And then finally, we have this question: does a particular practitioner require both the sevenfold instructions and exchanging self and other? That's a good, difficult question. There's different ways to say that. So I maybe would say no, we don't need both. And it's sometimes said in the text that the sevenfold instructions are more geared towards people who are more emotional in their approach. It's helpful for them to think every sentient being was my mother, and then to feel a sense of closeness with all sentient beings. Whereas the exchanging self and other, which we see in the engaging in the Bodhisattva deeds by Shantideva in the 8th chapter, that's where it's mainly taken from, that is a reasoning-based generation of bodhicitta, thinking that all sentient beings are equal in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So why is it reasonable to give myself special treatment? So it's just based on using reasoning to think about these things. So that's meant to be for people who are more reasoning based and not effective in their approach to things. Nevertheless, in the text, General Meaning of the Middle Way by Jason Shugi Gelsen, he does say, he's talking about the sharp faculty of bodhisattvas who are supposed to be the ones that approach the reasoning, and he says, when they meditate on the sevenfold cause and effect instruction. He used that wording explicitly, so it implies that they would use that. So there's some question. But then the question really, in terms of not just giving quotations, but does the practice of exchanging self and others necessitate the practice of, for example, remembering all sentient beings as one's mother? It would seem maybe not. So we could say, well, one could meditate on exchanging self and others and not the sevenfold instructions. Now, does it go the other way? Is it possible to meditate on the sevenfold instructions and not exchange self and others? Now, there are 2 steps within the exchanging self and others. There's 5 steps, but the first step is equanimity. And then the second and third are the ones I'm focusing on here. The second and third are thinking about, through countless lines of reasoning, the faults of cherishing oneself. And then thirdly, through countless lines of reasoning, the faults of, the advantages of cherishing others. So at least that was how I answered this in debate was, well, that's saying countless lines of reasoning. So that's a different kind of meditation. Somebody could meditate on the sevenfold cause and effect instructions and just meditate on one point, one thing about same beings being my mother, rather than thinking about it through all different kinds of reasoning. So there's this way that it's more geared towards people who approach things analytically. But that is a debatable point. I think that debate, we had a bit of an easier time. I think the people were a little tired. It was late at night. So maybe they could have made it harder for us if they had wanted to. And some of you might have seen there was a video posted on YouTube some years ago with myself debating with Geshe Lexok, and he debated me on this point. Fortunately for me, when they edited the debate, they didn't show me having any kind of hard time, but he debated it pretty well. So it depends on your position, and his position was, well, if somebody perfects exchanging self and others, but does not perfect sevenfold instructions, if they achieve a Buddhahood, then they haven't perfected all practices. So how could they be a Buddha? I don't know. That's a question. But in any case, practically speaking, we'll see, for example, Bhavankar Rinpoche presents a way of combining these two. So it's certainly possible to combine both kinds of meditation. The question is just whether it's necessary to do so. So next we have object of observation, object of mode of apprehension, and others' purpose. So some of you who have studied minds and awareness will know these terms. First of all, we have object of observation. So for example, if we have a fairly straightforward mind, so we say the mind that realizes sound as impermanent, right? So here, it's the sound is the object of observation. The object of the mode of apprehension is impermanence. The appearing object is also impermanence. Generally speaking, for a conceptual consciousness, the appearing it's not. If it's a conceptual consciousness apprehending impermanence, the appearing object would be the meaning generality of impermanence, not impermanence itself. Right? Some of you will know that. But if it's a direct perception, the appearing object is going to be impermanence. The direct object and the object of the mode of apprehension are the same. But the observed object is what it observes. It first observes sound and then thinks it's impermanent. And actually, there's quite some question in debate, if you debate about Dharmakirti's text, about whether a mind apprehending sound as impermanent even has an appearance of sound, whether sound is realized explicitly in an appearing manner or whether it's realized implicitly by realizing sound. It doesn't mean that one doesn't know what sound is, but that one first apprehends sound and then goes on to meditate on impermanence. There's no longer an appearance of sound to the consciousness. There's some question about that. But in any case, with that example, so we first observe sound and then think this is impermanent. So that's the mode of apprehension. How is it apprehending? Whereas the apprehended object is the same as the appearing object. The mode of apprehension, it's the way it's conceived or the way that it's directly perceived. So what is the mode of, what are these in terms of bodhicitta? That's not explicitly stated in the text. The object of observation is talked about. The object of the mode of apprehension is not. So it becomes quite a point of debate. What would we say? And there's some problems with, we might think, well, it's quite straightforward. There is the mind, the full enlightenment is the object that's being apprehended as the object of the mode of apprehension. We might not question that, but there's some questions here that come up if we say that. So first of all, is if a realizing mind observes an object, must it realize the object? So a realizing mind means either a valid cognizer or a subsequent cognizer. It means one that is incontrovertible. So if such an incontrovertible mind observes an object, must it realize that object? So, for example, if we think sound is impermanent, we are realizing impermanence, or do we have to also realize sound? And there seems to be various, quotations that say different things in this regard. So the first one is this question here. We have the second point here. Does compassion observing the unobserved realize the unobserved? Some of you might know we have the three types of compassion as presented in Madhyamaka near the beginning of the presentation in Chandrakirti's work. So we have compassion observing sentient beings, which is not supported by either the realization of impermanence or of selflessness, or we have compassion observing phenomena, which observes sentient beings within the understanding that they are impermanent, or also that they are selfless in the sense of not being substantial, self-existent. So there's some kind of wisdom supporting the compassion. And then there is compassion that observing the unobserved, which actually means that one observes sentient beings and wishes them to be free of suffering within the understanding that they are empty of inherent existence. But those are two different minds. Compassion observing the unobserved does not literally observe the unobserved. It's just a name. And it says that very clearly in the etymology that Tsongkhapa gives, based upon Chantakirti's own etymology of it in his auto commentary. So really it means it's migmela migba in Tibetan. Migmela migba ninje. But it's just cutting out the earlier and later words. It's like chula migme ninje, also for the observing the phenomena. It's actually a much longer name than that. It just shortened into that, hyphenated into that. So it really should mean compassion observing sentient beings that are characterized by being unobserved. It means something quite different. So it's clear in Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen's examining extremes, an alternate text that he wrote on the first chapter, that he says it does not observe the unobserved, because unobserved is synonymous with emptiness. If compassion observed the unobserved, he says, then it would realize the unobserved. That would contradict it being a method side. We have the method side and the wisdom side in terms or class of realizers. If it was a method realizer, then in the sentient beings at least, it cannot also observe something very subtle like emptiness. It's not possible to both be thinking something, well, how wonderful if all sentient beings were free of suffering, and to be analytically very absorbed, such that you can or not directly, but at least understand emptiness. One mind cannot do the same two things at the same time. They are very different functions. So it says the implication though is if it observed the unobserved, then it would have to realize it. So what some people take that to be saying is that, well, why? Because compassion is a realizing mind, and any realizing mind that observes anything has to realize that object. But then we have this question, well, what about the uninterrupted path, meditating on the emptiness of a vase? Does it realize a vase? We say no. That's quite explicit. Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen says the same thing later in that same text, the examining extremes, in the section on the path of preparation. He says the vase does not even appear to that mind. It is not realized. If it was, then emptiness would be an affirming negation, because it's realized in conjunction with a positive phenomena like a vase. But emptiness is realized simply as a non-affirming negation. It's a mere absence. There's no positive phenomena that is affirmed. So the realization, it observes the vase, but it does not realize it. It observes that, on the basis of that, it realizes emptiness. That already seems to be contradictory. Then we have this quotation in the second chapter of Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen's commentary on the perfection, where he says that when one observes the naturally abiding lineage, then one necessarily realizes it. Well, in terms of a realizing mind, right? He explicitly says, for example, if you observe the naturally abiding lineage and then hold it to be truly existent, that mind is a wrong consciousness. So it observes it, but it need to realize it. But he says that the mind that is so some of you might know in the second chapter, we have the path of, what does it say? Knower of the paths that knows the paths of solitary realizers. So it says, because there's this talk in Ornament of the Essence in chapter 2 about that particular mind and whether it observes the natural abiding lineage as its objective support. And Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen says, well, if it observed that, then it would have to realize it. But this is a Hinayana class of realization, and it's a method side. Or it doesn't have to be method side, but can be. And so it doesn't realize the naturally abiding lineage. So in that context, when it says in the path consciousness that is knowing the paths the knower of paths that knows the paths of solitary realizers, then when it says it has as its basis the naturally abiding lineage, it doesn't mean basis as its objective support. There's different ways of something being a basis. It means that it's the basis in the way that he says in the way that space supports wind. So there's in Indian cosmology the idea that based on there being space, then wind, then things can move. There can be motion. So they're actually two different natures. So it's a different kind of support. But the main point here is that if it observed it, it would have to realize it. So it seems to be saying that, but at least how I answered in debate is that he's talking about if it was the objective support. It's not saying if it was observed. There's slightly different things. So one is in Tibetan nikden, objective support, and then telemikpa, observing that is two different things. So basically our position, or at least my position in this context, was that an observing mind, even if it's a realizing mind, does not have to realize that object. It's very clear in the context of the direct perception of emptiness. But it's a little bit more vague in the context of bodhicitta, which is not observing a non-affirming negation, so it doesn't necessarily have to be precluded by having a realization of some kind of positive phenomena. So is bodhicitta a realizing mind? That's the first question. If it wasn't, then there would be no problem in the first place. Well, there's reason to think that that is at least Jitchen Chuki Geltsen's position for Sera Je. So in the context of the path of preparation, when he talks about what is the nature of the path of preparation, which of the 7 kinds of awareness is it? So he says that it essentially comes down to the point that it is a subsequent cognizer by eliminating the other 6. But he says it has to be one of the 7 kinds of awareness, and it's not the other 6. So therefore, it's a subsequent cognizer. And he says, why does it have to be one of the 7 types of awareness? He says the reason is easy, meaning it's obvious, which is generally taken to mean, well, because it's a mind. Any mind has to be one of the 7 types of awareness. So if that's the case, then the bodhicitta cannot be some other kind of mind other than one of the 7. Furthermore, he says it's not a correctly assuming consciousness, because among the 7 kinds of awareness, we have valid direct perception, valid inferential cognition, subsequent cognizers, correctly assuming consciousness, and then doubt, and a mind to which an object appears but is not ascertained, and a wrong consciousness. Those latter 3 are obviously not, because they couldn't be a path. That we might think, well, maybe a path could be a correctly assuming consciousness, that we could assume that it's possible to achieve enlightenment, or that bodhicitta itself could be an assumption, whereas the person could realize with a different mind in their continuum full enlightenment. But bodhicitta itself is just a wish, so it's not a valid cognizer or a realizing mind. But Jitsen Jiggy Gelsen explicitly says that the path of preparation is not a correctly assuming consciousness, because it is a liberation path. And a liberation path is synonymous with a path. He's saying very clearly, to be a path, something has to be a realizing mind. So that would pretty well narrow it down, that bodhicitta should be a realizing mind. However, there is some doubt here. Some people say, in this context, he's talking about an analytical mind, because he's talking about the path of preparation that's absorbed single-pointedly on emptiness. So there could be a difference that an analytical mind has to be, an analytical path has to be one of the 7 types of awareness, has to be realizing its object, has to be a realizing mind, and then a wishing mind, something like bodhicitta or great compassion. Is there a difference? Well, he said earlier, as we see, that if compassion observed the unobserved, it must realize it. So wasn't he implying that in that context, that realizing mind, even a wishing mind, has to do the same thing? So we'll talk about that in the next slide. But finally, we have His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who said, I think this was in his text, Sera Je, which in English, I think, what would it be? It would translate as peace and happiness of mind, but I don't think that's how it is translated. I could try to find that out later. But in any case, he says, I'm inclined to think that bodhicitta, great compassion, and so on, are not one of the 7 types of awareness. So that's pretty explicit. So what do we disagree with His Holiness? When I went to one of these debates, I remember it was one of the better ones. These guys were really good. I learned a lot from them, and they were very fair. They were interested in getting to the point, not just embarrassing me, but trying to really help us to learn something. So at the very end of the debate, when I had stated, well, yes, that any awareness has to be one of the 7 types, they gave this quotation from His Holiness, and they said, well, don't you accept His Holiness, what he says? So that was just as the time was ending. So we were just breaking up, and it was finished. So I was able to speak frankly, and I said, well, of course, I respect what His Holiness says, and I think maybe he's right. But when I'm in debate, I wouldn't accept that because we don't want to contradict our textbooks. So they laughed and they appreciated that. So that's we see very clearly here. This is what happens. We have different texts placed there, different things. It would seem very hard to line up what His Holiness is saying with Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen. But one way to do it would be to say, well, Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen is saying that the reason is easy only in terms of analytical minds. His Holiness is talking about a wishing mind. Because really, what does it mean for a wishing mind? Saying, I wish to achieve enlightenment. I wish to free all sentient beings from suffering. Is it even a question? Does it realize its object? It's just thinking, oh, that would be great. So if I think, I wish that the weather was not so hot tomorrow, what's to realize? What am I? Is that a wrong consciousness? Well, that's not really a question. Is it right or wrong? It's a question of what you want. I'm not saying I predict that it's going to be cooler tomorrow. I'm just saying I wish it wasn't so hot. So what of the 7 minds? Is it a correctly assuming consciousness? Well, maybe it's not going to be hot tomorrow. It's not a matter of whether it's controvertible or not. It's not somebody can convince you it's not going to be hot. It doesn't change the fact that I wish it's going to be hot, going to be hot tomorrow. So that's quite a question in terms of these wishing minds. Where do they fit in? So next we have bodhicitta observing the nature body. This is one of the major questions that comes up in this very context. So we talk about the 4 bodies of a Buddha: the nature body, the wisdom truth body, the enjoyment body, or complete enjoyment body, and the emanation body. So the question is, can bodhicitta, well, first of all, does bodhicitta have to observe the nature body? Does it have to observe all 4 bodies? In which case it would have to observe the nature body. And the nature body is emptiness, right? We have 2 kinds of nature body: the naturally so the naturally pure nature body, and the pure of the adventitious affliction. So the latter one is not emptiness, at least in the this Savadhandrika system, but the first one is. So if we observe the naturally pure nature body and wish to achieve that, it's observing emptiness. So does bodhicitta observe that? In which case it would be like compassion observing the non-observation, which we said it can't happen because it's a method kind of path, whereas so is bodhicitta. So then the question: does it realize the nature body? If it observes it, it's a realizing mind. If it observes it, doesn't have to realize it. And then third, is it on a method aspect like great compassion, like I just said? And then does it realize the positive qualities of the nature body? So this is how some people answer. They say that when it says it observes the nature body, it's not literally observing the nature body, it's just observing the positive qualities. In Tibet, we say lekpe cha, the good parts of it, thinking how great it would be to achieve that without literally focusing upon the nature body. So that's a fairly common way that people answer. The question also is, must it observe the 4 bodies? Maybe we just say, well, bodhicitta doesn't observe the nature body at all. And certainly we have this question, there's a non-Mahayana bodhisattva. It's fairly clear, at least in the Savadhandrika system, that there can be a non-Madhyamaka bodhisattva. So for example, a Vaibhashika or a Chittamatra even, who enters the bodhisattva path based on simply not realizing the nature body or not realizing emptiness, but we say they dull faculty. Again, it's not so nice to say, but the point is meaning that they approach things in terms of faith as opposed to reasoning. So they're able to wish to achieve enlightenment in an uncontrived way without it actually realizing enlightenment. So they by necessity do not realize the nature body, because the nature they can't realize emptiness. It's understood that to realize emptiness, one has to have Madhyamaka tenets. Actually, where it says this explicitly, if you study the Madhyamaka in Tenzin Gache's commentary, the general meaning of Madhyamaka, it's just 1 or 2 pages on the 2nd chapter, and he says very explicitly, he talks about Citamata Bodhisattvas. But some of my classmates still didn't accept that because it's very hard in the Prasangika system, a question of how a bodhisattva can be a Chittamatra, because even to realize the mere liberation, you need to be a Prasangika Madhyamaka. But in the Svanandrika system, you don't need to realize emptiness to realize liberation. So there's some more room for that to be possible. So that if there was such a person that's a Vaibhashika, that's a bodhisattva, then of course they don't realize emptiness. They can't possibly observe all 4 bodies and realize them. So maybe we could say that Bodhicitta does not have to observe the 4 bodies. So here's a tentative solution that this is generally how we came to answer it, through getting refined by being contradicted very many times in our debates, contradicting ourselves, I should say. So a tentative solution, this is how I would answer it now. Okay, first of all, the observed object is any of the 4 bodies. It does not have to be all 4 of them. So for example, a Vaibhashika Bodhisattva, they could, similar to what we talked about earlier, just see the form body of the Buddha, not really understand the causes that go into it, and think, I would like to be like that, but not just in a meaningless way, like I want to be so popular, but thinking I would like to have that ability. We could imagine that somebody reads the Hinayana Sutras and there's no talk about the Bodhisattva path in an extensive way, how to meditate on emptiness, and just think, I don't want to just be like those arhats, I want to be like the Buddha and be able to teach and so effectively, and have an uncontrived wish to do so. So it's really just observing the form body, which is the Shakyamuni Buddha himself is a form body. So we could say that, first of all. Secondly, the object of the mode of apprehension is I must achieve that. That's generally what people tend to come to in debate. It's not enlightenment itself. It's that one observes enlightenment, which is the observed object, and then thinks, I must achieve that. That's it. So in Tibetan, we say Jongjuk Top Guba. So just it's necessary to do so, necessary to achieve that. So it is in some sense a wishing mind, like we talked about earlier. So we say a wishing mind needn't realize its observed object. Now, I wouldn't go so far to say that wishing mind is not a valid cognizer or realizing mind at all, because, as I said, that would contradict our own position in the textbook. But whether that's true, well, I say His Holiness seems to be quite explicit that it needed to be a realizing mind. But if we take for granted that it must be a realizing mind, at the very least, it needn't realize its observed object. It could observe, for example, the nature body, and think, I'd like to achieve that. So even if somebody is a Madhyamaka Bodhisattva and has realized the nature body, the bodhicitta itself doesn't have to do so. Otherwise, it would contradict it being a method side mind. So it's just in a general sense, they know what the nature body is from their previous ascertainment of it, but then they just wish to achieve that. So it doesn't have to actually have a full comprehension of that in that mental event. Now, of course, you might, if some of you are paying very close attention, you would see, well, we just said, if compassion observed, great compassion observed, unobserved, it would have to realize it. So what we say in the answer to that, well, the reason is that for great compassion, we already know what the object of the mode of apprehension is. That's pretty clear. It's may all sentient beings be free of suffering. So, I actually made a mistake there. We know the observed object of compassion is all sentient beings. That's already explicit. So if it observed objectlessness or emptiness, then it would have to observe it in the context of a realization of it being the object of the mode of apprehension, as opposed to it being the observed object, because something else already fits into that category. That's anyway how we defend our position as Sera Je monks, because that's explicit in our textbook. But that's quite a technical point. Questionable. We have to think about it. And furthermore, a sentient being's bodhicitta is always a subsequent cognizer. right? Because somebody realizes enlightenment first with a valid cognizer, the first moment, and then later then develops an uncontrived wish to achieve it. So as we say here, I think I forgot that I'd put that already in here. If a mind like non-objectifying compassion realizes sentient beings characterized by non-objectification, it didn't realize non-objectification. So that's what the definition of compassion, observing the unobserved, is one that observes sentient beings that is characterized by non-objectification. So what that is understood to mean is that it's supported, or we say directly conjoined, with a mind that is realizing the emptiness of sentient beings. So those two minds are functioning simultaneously. That we'll discuss later, although I'm realizing we might not have time. We'll have to maybe do this in a later session, which is perfectly fine. Better we get through these things clearly. So if bodhicitta, if compassion is directly conjoined with that mind, then it can be said to realize sentient beings characterized by non-objectification in terms of being supported by that. Likewise, for example, we talk about the truth of suffering. So some of you might know the definition of truth of suffering that's given in Jason Chuki Gelson's textbook is that which is characterized by being impermanent, impermanent in the nature of suffering, empty, and selfless. So if I realize the truth of suffering, do I have to realize all four of those things? That's a bit problematic, because one realizes that the appropriating aggregates are impermanent and that they are selfless at the same time with one mind. And then the selflessness would not be a non-affirming negation. So we understand when it says it's characterized by those four, that it's realized, supported by those four realizations. The one realizes that the aggregates are impermanent and in the nature of suffering, empty, and selfless. There are four different minds. And then those four combined lead to the understanding of the truth of suffering, which is kind of all four of those conjoined. It's a little easier in Tibetan because does not necessarily have to be a pluralizer. So we can say the mind that realizes those four could actually mean four minds. It could be a class of minds, a group of minds that together come to ascertain the truth of suffering. Now, one point that comes up in debate here, though, so there's this quotation from the first Dalai Lama, Gyalwa Gendendrup. He has a commentary on the valid cognition. It's called Semi-Rigyen, which I don't know. I don't think it's in English. I mean, it's the ornament of reason relating to valid cognition. So there he has this saying that there's a question of can a self-cognizer, right, or self-knower, sorry, right, Rangri in Tibetan, if it realizes a mind characterized by selflessness. So somebody first says that whatever is a self-knower necessarily is a valid cognizer to its object. So then he says, well, what about the self-knower that is observing the mind that's characterized by selflessness? And then he says, well, that's absurd, because then it would have to realize selflessness. And if this is in the context of a non-Arya being, because it's a direct perception, have to directly perceive selflessness, which a non-Arya being can't do. So then that would seem to say that if you realize something supported by something else, you realize the mind supported by or characterized by being selfless, you would have to realize that mind itself would have to realize selflessness. But the way, at least I answered this, is that, well, in this context, we're talking about a self-knower. A self-knower is not a path consciousness, or doesn't have any particular function of enhancing the meditation of a person. And so there's no talk about being supported by another mind, directly supported. What directly supported implies that when one mind is enhanced, the other one is also enhanced. You enhance renunciation, it will enhance your compassion. So therefore, compassion is supported or conjoined with renunciation. Whereas in no such thing as enhancing your self-knower, it just knows or it doesn't. There's not any way to increase it in a positive way. It's a neutral mind. So in that case, there's no talk of it being supported or conjoined in the context of being, characterized in the context of being conjoined. So therefore, the only option that's left is that it's realizing the mind characterized by selflessness, in the sense of realizing selflessness simultaneously with realizing the mind in which case that would be the problem. It would not directly support it. So I think the original plan had been that we would finish. Well, actually, I suppose it would have been half an hour ago, but in any case, in an hour and a half, and then have half an hour of questions. So I finished 12 of 21 slides. So I think maybe it's good we take a break and have questions, and then I can discuss later, about what we do in the next session, whether we continue with this or another subject. But I think it's good we can have a question and answer period now. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So thank you very much. Very able. It has been a wonderful presentation. And maybe we can open here a question and answer session with the residential students that are here in the Mandala room. So, any questions for
Hold on, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Let me see if I can turn on. I'm going to turn up the volume. I think if anyone's watching this in our house, which some of them are, please come, because I'm borrowing someone's computer. Oh, here we go. Okay. Now I can hear you better. Okay. It's still very soft, so maybe it's coming from your side.
I can try to this one. I'll try another one second.
If anyone else, I mentioned I can't hear them on the other room either, you're saying. Yeah, so I think there's a difficulty. If no one is able to hear, then please just type it in the chat. But in the meantime, if we could make it a little louder, then I'll be able to hear the questions.
Can you hear with this one?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you very well now. That's good.
Okay, now it's coming to, we have 3 microphones, so one is working.
Okay.
Hi, Tenzin Gache.
Yes, hello.
It's good to see you here. The question that I have is not as complicated, but I was wonder if when we were talking about the mother, they represent, that she is not going to be jumping to the well to save the son, and the father does. I was just wondering if it's connecting to the mother that represent the wisdom and the father that represent the method. And this is why, like, the father will be jumping and the mother is the one that realizing the suffering of the child or something like this. I was just wondering about that.
Well, I can't say for sure. I think that's certainly, as I said before, it's a bit of a politically incorrect way to speak today, and that would make it a lot more amenable. And maybe it's a nice way to think about it. Whether it's in Tsongkhapa's intention, I don't get that impression. He doesn't say it explicitly, but we could maybe think of it that way, make it, that is true, that is you're saying. We're merely having wisdom is not enough. We say that the Hinayana practitioner also has wisdom, but without compassion, then there's no force to actually want to do something about it. So that would be a nice way to think about it. And certainly you're right that generally we say the mother like wisdom and the father like the father like means or compassion.
Yeah, I was thinking about it because also the father is representing the lineage, right? So then it's not about, if you interpret it without thinking about what father and mother represent in for us ordinary way of looking at it, but if you look at it from the way it's presented in anyway what we study in Abhisamaya Alamkara, then that could be like more politically correct if you think about it like that.
Yeah. I think, as I say, I think it's a nice way to reconcile it. We have to look. I mean, Tsongkhapa, he says this: there's the father like and the mother like, and I haven't seen where he gets that source, whether he came up with that position himself. The first place to check would be the Tenrim, which is the stages of the teachings, which was written earlier by Drolungpa, another Tibetan, then Tsongkhapa's Lamrim is, the structure is much based on that text. And then see if there's some traceable source for this and what, and in that context, how they're using it. But as I say in Lamrim Chenmo, it doesn't say anything more than that, so it was hard to say if we can read that into it.
All right, thank you. And think about it. And thank you again for the teaching.
Okay, yes.
Yes, another question. How all these studies in this precision of this topic has helped you in developing the mind and enhancing your meditation?
That's a very good question. That's a very broad question. I had personally, I mean, that's an ongoing question, and it's something that I had a very big question about when I first came here to Sera. As I often say to people, I had no wish to study all these years. I came and saw this debate and the way and the structure of the monastery is a noisy place sometimes. It's a very intense place. It's certainly not a how do you say, what we consider like a meditative environment, at least in the course level, which I can explain a little bit about that. And so early on, I asked my teacher, Jurindra Baje, precious teacher, who had done this course himself. I said, well, I have some questions and I'm concerned. Maybe it would be better to do a retreat. And his answer was, well, it's great that you want to do retreat, but if you go through this study program first, then your retreat will be a lot more meaningful. And Khedje Lama Rinpoche said that many times when he came to Sera. He would address the monks and say that what you're doing here, being in the monastery at Sera, is the best possible preliminary practice, much better than doing 100,000 prostrations or doing all the other, what we normally consider preliminary practices. The best thing is just to be here in the monastery and follow the discipline and do the study. And that will prepare you for meditation. So early on, certainly it was a bit of kind of taking it on faith. And at least saying, I'll give it a try. And it took quite a while. And I think what really happened first for me was getting excited about debate. And, so I was going to mention also in the concept of Chodron Rinpoche, right, it was hard to argue somebody who himself had been in retreat for 20 years to say that maybe you don't have enough experience to speak on that. But he himself had studied at Sera for 20 years and then done 20 years of retreat. So early on, I remember also when I was my first year of debate, and I asked Rinpoche, I was concerned. I was getting worked up in debate sometimes, and even feeling a little angry. Maybe I should try to calm down and not get worked up. And he actually said the opposite, that if everyone came to debate and just acted very humble, then nobody would really benefit from debate. Now again, She, as anyone knew him, was one of the most humble, quiet people. It was also often hard to hear him because he was almost whispering. But I think, as I understand, a lot of that came from his years of retreat. But before that, he'd been actually one of the best debaters at Sera Je and back in Tibet. So I gradually kind of got excited about doing this, especially once we started studying the text in the fourth year. The first 3 years were more introductory, and it was just learning how to debate. And it's kind of carried away by it. And I would say, I just felt there's something very special here. And it felt to me, this is right. I don't know why. And to put all of my effort into this. And I lost interest in doing, a lot of other kinds of practices and just being here in the monastery, going to pujas, doing debate. And I talked about, the rikchung earlier. That was a very important part of my life, going through my development, trying to debate in public and feel like I'm establishing myself as a debater in the monastery, and that seems somehow that's okay. You're trying to build your career here, and sort of not worrying about, is this okay or not? Am I doing real practice? And then gradually over the years, things start to fall into place. How does this work? It's not like it's now all obvious to me, and I don't say that I am now having some kind of realization or as a result of it. But looking back, I think I'm glad I did this. I think it would have been a mistake to go and do retreat when I was 23 years old. I don't think I was mature enough as a spiritual practitioner. And whether I haven't developed calm abiding being here in the monastery. Rinpoche said that to me. You're not going to get calm abiding going to debate every day. But I think I've become a much more mature person through this process, and hopefully a little wiser. It's not just all these debates, some of these things, as I say, it's just quite arcane, all these little points. But you learn to think about things and you learn to question things. And I definitely think that I don't take things so easily in terms of people tell me something, and I'm much less likely to just believe that what they say than when I was younger, even if it's a teacher. So like I said here, with His Holiness, we don't just say His Holiness said so and therefore it's true. And that's quite pronounced. We see that among the monks at Sera. It's not acceptable to just say my teacher said so. It's okay to question and to have a different opinion. Of course, as I said, that when you're in the class with the teacher, you don't directly say, at least you're saying it in a very careful way if you're going to do that, but you don't directly say, I disagree or try to debate them. But it's perfectly fine to have a different position yourself. And so, as I said, gradually being through this process and growing up in the monastery, it's not just going to debate, it's going to pujas, it's living in the monastic vows, it's living in this very difficult community in the sense that you're always being confronted with things. You cannot hide here. And now, I'd say personally for myself, my own development, I mentioned about the early debates I was doing, and now being director of the house here and having students of my own that I have to take care of. I didn't think as a monk I was going to have children, but they gave me a young child last year, and I learned how to be a parent. That's a very important part of development. It's different, a little different. I notice I care about this boy very much, but there's not the same kind of attachment. I don't like if he does well at school or not. I don't have to feel, oh, I'm such a great parent and gloat over it. It's more just concern for him, which is a little different than if I had given birth, actually been the birth father. So there's like kind of a process in the monastery of, even though you're not living in the world, because that's sometimes a question people have, and a question I had also before I became a monk. Well, if you become a monk, aren't you just running away from everything and all your responsibilities? And what you learn in the monastery is that you go through that same process, but as part of your spiritual development. And the debate is just part of it. You have this career, that's your debate. And you learn how to debate really well. And when you're older, you start to think about what it really means. And some of the debates aren't so useful for your personal practice, but a lot of the points are, and more than anything, it's the ability to question and to look very precisely at what's being said, and not just take it because it says so in the text and think it's all so straightforward. Because I would say also that after almost 20 years here at Sera, it's a lot less straightforward to me than when I started of feeling faith in Buddhism and in the Buddha. I don't feel it's what the Buddha would have wanted for us to just accept everything he said. That's what he explicitly said. Don't just take it because I said so. And so while early on it was quite comforting to have a lot of faith in that, over the years, we learned to have a very different view of things. And I think that's the purpose of the being here. That's what Tibetans explicitly say, is that in the monastery, you lose your faith, because for them, they grew up with this religion. But then when they come to the monastery, and learn to be a little bit more mature about it. My boy is here right now. He's just come.
Thank you very much. Other question? Can you hear me well now?
I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you very well.
Okay, then we have Bernadette.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, Venerable Gache.
Hello.
Hello. So, yeah, my question is, you said that prasangikas don't accept non-prasangika bodhisattvas. And you gave us the reason you need to realize emptiness to realize liberation. And I can So I'm guessing what you mean by that is you need to realize emptiness to understand liberation is possible and to wish for liberation for the benefit of all sentient beings. Is that roughly what you meant?
Well, not liberation for all sentient beings, but mere liberation. So,
Okay, so, okay.
yeah.
Then my question is, so in that case, it follows that for you there are no, or for the Prasangikas, you would say there's no such thing as a dull faculty bodhisattva. And then we also say that you need to realize emptiness before you can generate renunciation for the same reason that you gave.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. These are the big debates. You do well on the debate courtyard. At least in debating, rather than the question is how to answer it, right? Okay, are you finished, or I'll answer unless you had more to say?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, there's several points here. One is this question. I mean, first of all, what I thought you were going to say, which I think is worth mentioning, is it's saying that one has to be a prasangika to enter the path at all. Well, is it basically saying that all those Theravadan practitioners, for example, haven't entered the path? Sera Je is very explicit about that in his text, the Tongtun, which it's translated as dose of emptiness, but I think really Jipten Jinpa says the meaning of that word is like the compendium. Anyway, he has this text on Madhyamaka and also on Chittamatra in that text. He mentions some people might say, well, Hinayana practitioners can't realize emptiness. He said, don't denigrate the Hinayana. It's those of holders of Hinayana tenets or non-Madhyamaka tenets cannot realize emptiness. Doesn't mean people who practice the path cannot realize emptiness. Somebody personally, in terms of their view, whether they understand historically who was Chandrakirti and what is the Prasangika school, they have to understand emptiness in this way. But that doesn't mean that they have to accept the Mahayana system as a whole, or be involved in the lineage of the Madhyamaka system. It just means that they have to understand things as lacking inherent existence and what that means, even if they don't use those words. But anyway, your question also is whether then in order to just achieve, to wish for mere liberation. Okay, so and also, then you can't have a dull faculty bodhisattva. Okay, so that's first of all, as I said, in the second chapter of general meaning of Madhyamaka, Jetsun Gelsen does explicitly say there could be a Chittamatra who is a bodhisattva. The general position that seems to be taken among people at Sera Je is that there can be a bodhisattva who is a Chittamatra. There cannot be a Hinayana practitioner. A Hinayana practitioner has to be a Madhyamaka. But then my classmate I was just mentioning, he takes the even further position that even a bodhisattva has to be a Madhyamaka, and he rejects or explains this textbook statement in a different way. So I was just mentioning that, but generally speaking, for example, Khensur Rinpoche Losandelik, as many of you will know, he was one of the position because he's the main teacher of my teacher at Sera, Geshe Ngawang Sangye, who's abbot of Gyume now, some of you might know. So his teacher, he was reporting to me what Khensur Losandelik said, which was that to be a bodhisattva, it's possible to just wish for enlightenment for all sentient beings and not to have realized it. Whereas because the Hinayana path is not so much based on this magnanimous heart of Bodhicitta, it has to be, there's only one way to enter the path, which is through the analysis of emptiness. But in either case, then there's the understanding that there's different kinds of realization of emptiness, right? The Hinayana practitioner is only realizing emptiness in a narrow way, as opposed to the countless lines of reasoning that classify the Madhyamaka realization of emptiness, which, as I said before, this comes from having great compassion and thinking, I'm not only going to, do this, meditate on emptiness for my own purpose, but do so in order to liberate all sentient beings and to have the full state of a Buddha. And to fully understand what a Buddha is, we have to understand that it's possible to abandon the knowledge obscurations. In order to do that, we have to have a very powerful mind that understands things from all different kinds of angles. This is generally the rationale that's given behind why we study so much. It's not enough just to realize emptiness. We have to realize it in a very deep and broad way. And the classic example of what is countless lines of reasoning is the 27 chapters of Root Wisdom by Nagarjuna, where he analyzes emptiness again and again from many different angles. It's not enough just to have a simple a realization of selflessness in terms of the aggregates are empty. It has to be done in many different ways from many different reasons. So that a little answers your first question. Then about renunciation, that's also a big question. So for the Hinayana practitioner, yes, they have to realize liberation, which necessitates realizing emptiness, because the liberation itself is a form of emptiness. And also they have to realize the possibility of abandoning the afflictive obscurations, which are rooted in the apprehension or the misapprehension of true existence. So one has to realize that is a wrong consciousness that can be abandoned. For the Mahayana, it's not necessary. Now, one argument is that I think it was Khencher Losang Sering, who was another former abbot of Sera, he had this position, but that the bodhicitta for a bodhisattva is the same as the renunciation. They don't have two separate minds, because for them, the liberation is the Buddha's liberation. It's not just Hinayana liberation. And so the wish to achieve Buddha's liberation is enlightenment. The Buddha's liberation is the nature body. So in that case, their wish for liberation, they're wishing for, in this context, so if you had it, for example, a Chittamatra Bodhisattva, they understand the Four Noble Truths in the coarse way, which it will be talk about maybe in a later talk when we talk about Madhyamaka. Then they, in the context of that, they understand liberation as it's taught in this to the less developed disciples. So they have some realization of the possibility of abandoning the apprehension of a substantial self-existent self, a person. And so they can, on that basis, understand some piece of liberation, even though they don't have the full understanding of what liberation is. And also, as I said earlier, have this understanding of the Buddha simply by seeing a person and wishing to achieve like that. The last point is another very difficult question, which I maybe won't get into, but it's worth mentioning. Right. So, for example, we have in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara saying that Shantideva saying, if I don't first have this wish for myself, how can I possibly have it for others? If I don't think may I myself be free of suffering, how could I wish others are? And also in the 400 stanzas by Aryadeva, saying that essentially, you need to have first reversed, first thought about the process of suffering and the 12 the length of a dependent origination in terms of your own suffering, and then you can go on to meditate on it for others. So it would appear to say that you need to have uncontrived renunciation before you have uncontrived compassion, right? Because great compassion, realizing that wishing all sentient beings to be free of all suffering. So that becomes a very big debate, and there's a lot of talk about that. So maybe I'll leave that, but that's something to think about. Because if you had uncontrived renunciation before you had uncontrived great compassion, then you would re-enter the path to liberation. In which case, you can't enter a Mahayana path. You're not a Mahayanist yet. You have great compassion. So are you a Hinayanist in the meantime? Which would imply that all Mahayanists are first Hinayanist, which would contradict a lot of points in a lot of these textbooks.
So thank you very much. Since that we are. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but it was not as clear as before. If you have that other microphone, it's better.
Okay, so thank you very much. It's 4:30 here.
Okay.
Thank you very much for all your explanation, and we are looking forward to seeing the other slides in the second part of Bodhicitta.
Okay.
And
let's be in
if you
touch,
want
and
to lead the dedication of merits.
Oh yes, we can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we dedicate this merit accumulated through our discussion of Bodhicitta. We first of all dedicate for the complete enlightenment of all sentient beings, that they may be free of all of their sufferings as possible in a very deep way. And then furthermore, that we ourselves may be the ones to create that, to create the causes for that. And so for that purpose, may we ourselves be able to realize bodhicitta, actualize the path in our mind streams, and quickly traverse upon the paths and grounds to full enlightenment. And then lastly, of course, we'll dedicate the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and for the swift return of the unmistaken reincarnation of Khyabde Lama Zopa Rinpoche.
Okay, so thank you so much for Tenzin Gache. We keep in touch.
Yes, be in
And I
touch.
think that it has been very meaningful to listen to you all these points on bodhicitta. And we look forward to see you in the next presentation of bodhicitta.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.